I'm Shelley Day from Utah, where the snow is dusting the Salt Lake Valley and it is absolutely beautiful outside. But I'm delighted to be inside with all of you. As chair of the Legislative Research Librarian Staff Section, welcome to our first webinar. We thank NCSL and Infinite for their collaboration in connecting us across the states. And to our audience, your attendance is much appreciated. We're excited to share one of our many fascinating functions, that of researching legislative histories and intent. It's a valuable service that we provide for legislators and staff on an ongoing basis. For the legislative process and its success, we as legislative staff receive necessary information, make use of our knowledge, and impart equally necessary information. In so doing, everyone reaps the benefits. All the while, history is being created and preserved. How that history is recorded varies from state to state. And on that note, please welcome our speakers, Catherine Wusterhausen, Texas, Eddie Weeks, Tennessee, and Nan Bowers, Nevada. Knowledgeable and experienced, they'll share how things are done in their states and will be on hand to answer any questions at the end of our three-state presentation. Without further ado, Catherine, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm Catherine Wusterhausen, and I'm going to discuss researching legislative history in Texas with a focus on online research. First of all, in Texas, legislative history and intent are not already compiled. Researching legislative history and intent is a process of putting together many documents, finding pieces of a puzzle. I want to note that there is a difference between determining why legislation came about, the intent of the bill, rather than the history, the actual process of how the law was passed. To determine the history, you look at the evidence created during the legislative process, different versions of bills, fiscal notes, recordings of hearings and floor debates, and so forth. Determining the why will require compiling the history, and some documents, particularly bill analyses, may contain useful information about the intent as well. But determining why legislation came to be passed may also involve a broader search, looking at news articles, agency reports, or other sources to determine how an issue arose, who supported or opposed legislation, who proposed ideas or reforms. It may involve looking at previous legislative efforts, at agency rules, or at other sources that may provide some context for the legislation. Historically, researching both the how and the why could be obscure. The only official records which are consistently available in Texas are the bill files and the House and Senate journals. In Texas, the journals generally only summarize floor actions on a bill. They very rarely contain any sort of transcript of what was actually said. And before about 1973, bill files usually only contain the different versions of a piece of legislation, and they may not contain all the versions. Written analysis and background information are seldom included in early bill files, and committee hearings were generally not recorded or transcribed. The 1960s and early 1970s were a time of rapid change for the Texas legislature. Groups such as the Citizens Conference on State Legislatures argued that reforms were needed in state legislatures to allow the formerly sometime governments to meet the challenges of modern society. In Texas, reform efforts were given an extra boost by the Sharpstown stock fraud scandal. Accusations of bribery and corruption reached to the highest levels of state government, and voters demanded more openness. In 1973, the legislature began routinely recording committee hearings and floor debates, and committee staff began providing bill analysis, documents that give a short statement of the purpose of the bill and a summary of each section. Conference committee reports were required to include a side-by-side analysis showing where each provision in the conference committee version of the bill came from the House or from the Senate. In 1975, the House Study Group, now the House Research Organization, began providing lengthier analyses of bills scheduled for second reading in the House. In 1987, the Senate Office of Bill Analysis, now the Senate Research Center, was created. Today, the SRC prepares a bill analysis on every version of every Senate bill, on the engrossed versions of House bills, and on every enrolled bill. These efforts were originally intended to provide the legislators with better information about the bills they were considering. Now they also provide the researcher with valuable tools for legislative history and intent research. At the same time, rapidly advancing computer technology offered new opportunities to make government more efficient and transparent. In 1956, the Highway Department became the first Texas state agency to install a computer, an IBM 650. By 1962, more than 20 state agencies had some sort of electronic data processing equipment. The legislature began investigating computer use in 1967. By 1973, the Legislative Information System, housed on the Highway Department's computer, was being used to manage bill text and actions. Newspaper articles at the time celebrated the increases in efficiency and transparency which the new devices would bring. One trumpeted legislators' new ability to obtain an instantaneous video reproduction of the bill's language 15 lines at a time on a video monitor. In the 1970s and 80s, computer memory was a scarce resource, and the information in LIS was periodically printed off and erased. It was not until 1989 that bill history information was retained in electronic form. In 1995, the Texas Legislature moved on to the Internet with the site, Texas Legislature Online, which provided bill information from 1989 forward and bill text from 1993 forward. Beginning in 2001, the Legislative Reference Library and the Texas Legislative Council began developing the Legislative Archive System to provide electronic access to those earlier sessions. LRL staff began scanning bill files and entering information from the old LIS printouts into the new system. LAS became available online in 2008. Today, these two sites, TLO and LAS, make many of the resources necessary for researching Texas legislative history freely available online. The Texas Legislature Online site is the descendant of the LIS system of the 70s and the early legislative websites of the 1990s. It's the premier site for current Texas legislative information, while LAS contains information for earlier sessions. There is some overlap between the two sites, so legislative history researchers will want to use both sites. So, where to begin? Often, a researcher will begin by locating language in current Texas statutes as compiled in the Texas Codes and Statutes. I'll discuss some other approaches a bit later. An unannotated edition of the Texas Codes and Statutes is available on Texas Legislature Online. Now, these are not Texas officially published statutes. Texas doesn't have an official publication. Historically, Vernon's Texas Statutes and Codes, currently published by West, have been regarded as Texas quasi-official statutes. Annotated statutes are available in print and through services such as Westlaw and LexisNexis. Whatever your source, each statute has a legislative history note. This example is from the online statutes. At the bottom of each section is a list of acts adding and amending the section. This will be your roadmap for legislative research. If you're using the online statutes, you need to be aware that this history only goes back to the time when a section was added to a particular location in the code. Since the 1960s, Texas has been working on a systematic revision of its statutes, moving laws out of the Texas civil statutes and into a new series of subject-oriented codes. This means that many laws will have a history that extends back before the adoption of the code in which they are currently located. This history does not appear in the online statutes. As you can see, the history for Section 342.005 of the Finance Code here only goes back to 1999 in the online statutes. But if you look at the annotated statutes, the prior law section of the notes lists an act from 1997. This is one area where the free online resource can provide a starting point, but may not be sufficient. Once you have your list of notes and prior laws, you'll need to examine each act to determine exactly which ones you want to research. Our advice is usually to start with the most recent amendment listed and work your way backward until you locate the act with the language you want to research. The history notes give references to acts by identifying a chapter in the general and special laws of Texas, commonly known as the session laws. But to research the history of the act, you need to know the bill number. This is the key that unlocks the rest of the process. Bill numbers are listed after the chapter numbers in the session laws. Historically, the LRL received many calls from researchers who wanted to know which bill number was associated with a chapter. In 2002, we began putting bill chapter cross-reference charts online. The information has now been incorporated into the Legislative Archive System. In the LAS Direct Search, use the Search by Session Law chapter option, select the legislative session, and enter the chapter number from the legislative history note. If you have the bill number as your starting point, you can begin with that using the Search by Bill Number boxes. The LAS search results are intended to provide a gateway to online information about the bill, as well as pointers to help locate other sources of information. LAS is an ongoing project. We're constantly adding more to it, working both backwards and forwards, so the exact information available will vary from year to year and from bill to bill. You will always see at least a History tab and an Additional Sources tab. Basic information is provided on the Bill History tab. It may include the captions, links to session laws, links to veto proclamations, election results, committee membership information, or other information. A Text tab will appear if the text for the bill is available online. The LRL is in the process of scanning official bill files, bills from 1949 to 1999 have been scanned, and we're working on 2001 and 1947. The scans are currently image-only PDFs. It's not possible to search within the file, but we do add bookmarks to the PDFs which provide easy access to the documents within the file. The official bill files can contain a number of different documents. Different versions of the bill, conference committee reports, bill analyses, fiscal notes, or amendments are just some of the things you might find in a bill file. Sometimes other documents turn up in bill files. The older bill files are less standardized, and they generally contain fewer documents. LAS overlaps with Texas Legislature Online. For recent sessions where the official bill file has not been scanned, but bill text is available in TLO, LAS will contain a pointer to bill text on TLO. The Texas Legislature Online site provides the text of most of the content of the bill file. However, there are some documents, such as committee reports, committee vote sheets, and handwritten notes that are not included. One thing the bill files generally don't provide is a transcript of discussions or statements of legislative intent. To find out what was actually said about a bill, either on the floor or in committee, you'll need to look elsewhere. Since 1973, committee hearings and floor debates have been recorded. Videos for recent sessions are available online, as are some earlier audio recordings. To locate the recordings, you'll need to know the name of the committee that heard the bill, the dates of the public hearings, and the dates of the floor debates, all of which are available in the bill action list. The actions will also note if there are any record votes on the bill or any statements of legislative intent written to the journal. Statements of legislative intent are not common, but they do turn up from time to time and can be useful. Actions are available from 1989 to the present in TLO and from 1973 to 2009 in LAS. From 2005 on, the actions in TLO are linked to the online journals, so you can simply click on a link to view the corresponding journal page. Before 2005, there aren't any direct links to the journals, and there's no source that offers direct links to recordings, which are actually held by 3 different offices depending on the chamber and the session. The easiest way to know where to look for recordings and journals is to check the Additional Sources tab in LAS. If online journals and recordings are available for a session, links will appear on the Additional Sources page. The page also includes the addresses and phone numbers of the offices holding the recordings for the Senate and the House. By the time you've reviewed the bill file and the journals, looked over the bill history and the actions, and listened to any recordings, you should have a good idea of how your bill moves through the legislative process, its history. But if you want more background, the why, there are other sources you might want to investigate. Some of these options are linked to the last search results, while others may require a little more digging. Now, state agencies in Texas are required to undergo periodic review and legislative reauthorization. As part of the process, the Texas Sunset Commission reviews agencies and issues reports. If the bill you're researching relates to the reauthorization or continuation of an agency, Sunset reports may provide useful background information. Sunset reports are available online back to 1996, and earlier reports are available from the State Library. Earlier, we looked at a section of the Finance Code relating to the definition of a regulated loan. The section was amended in 2001 in a bill that had a caption stating it was related to the continuation and functions of the Office of Consumer Credit Commission. This caption pointed me to a Sunset report, which not only recommended the change that was included in the 2001 legislation, but also pointed me to another rich source of material, an interim report. The Texas legislature meets every other year. Since the 1970s, committees have continued to meet during the interim between the regular sessions to study significant issues, review legislation from previous sessions, and to monitor agencies. The reports issued by these committees, along with similar legislative reports issued during the session in earlier years, can provide valuable background information. Reports can include detailed analysis of issues, recommendations, and even draft legislation. The LRL has compiled a database of legislative reports that reaches back to 1846. It can be searched by subject, keyword, session, and committee name. Continuing with our example from the Finance Code, a quick search reveals that during the interim before the 2001 legislative session, both the House and the Senate had committees studying consumer credit issues. The reports provide a wealth of detail about the issues which shaped the law passed in 2001. Now, I mentioned earlier that Texas has undertaken a process of statutory revision. If the bill you're researching states in the caption that it's a non-substantive revision, correction, or addition, it was part of the Legislative Council's statutory revision program. Now, the Council is required by the Texas Government Code to carry out a complete, non-substantive revision of the Texas statutes, but it may not alter the sense, meaning, or effect of the statute. The Council generally creates a reviser's report for each new code adopted, which provides the text of the new code, the text of the prior law, and notes explaining any changes. The LRL has scanned reviser's reports from our collection and linked them to the corresponding bills in LAS. These can be particularly useful in cases in which a non-substantive revision appears to be making a significant change. For example, when the Water Code was adopted in 1971, language relating to property qualifications for electors in certain water districts was removed. At first glance, this appears to be a substantive change, but the reviser's notes explain that the United States Supreme Court had found laws requiring ownership of property, the qualifications of voting, to be unconstitutional. The Vernon's Annotated statutes also contain some of these reviser's notes and other historical notes and references. Secondary sources such as articles in newspapers, journals, or law reviews can also be valuable sources of insight into the who's and why's of legislation. While recent articles are often online, older material can be difficult to find. Most Texas papers are only available electronically back to the mid-1990s, and published indexes are seldom available. Since the early 20th century, the LRL has compiled a legislative clipping service, which is a valuable tool for locating older articles. The Clipping Service archive is available only to users in the Texas Capitol Complex. It's not generally available to the public. Since 2001, articles which mention bills are linked to the record for that bill, allowing related clips to appear as a tab on the last search results for users in the Capitol Complex. Users can also search the clips by subject and headline to locate articles which are not linked to a particular bill but might be related. Since 2001, citations to journal articles, law reviews, and related material located by LRL staff in the course of our work have also been linked to bills. These citations appear on the Articles tab in LAS, which is visible to the public. Sometimes you can find useful information in documents produced by non-legislative agencies. For example, opinions issued by the Texas Attorney General may discuss the intent of a statute. In this example, an Attorney General opinion reviews the legislature's intent in enacting a section of the Texas Health and Safety Code, examining whether a hospital district must provide non-emergency public health services to undocumented persons. Texas Attorney General opinions are online and searchable back to 1939. Agency rules and publications can also be helpful. As part of the reforms of the 1970s, Texas agency regulations are now collected in the Texas Administrative Code, and proposed and adopted rules are published in the Texas Register. Occasionally, the Texas Register may provide some discussion of the history of the bill. The example above is House Bill 2714 from 2007. The preamble to the adopted rules offers some discussion of definitions and other issues. Prior to 1973, agency rules and other documents can be difficult to find. The State Library has a strong collection, but agencies varied in the types of documents published. We started our discussion focusing on researching the history of an existing statute, but sometimes it's necessary to research legislation which is not included in the current codes and statutes, a law that's been repealed, for example, or a special or local law that's never included in the code. Since legislation doesn't always pass on its first attempt, it can also be useful to research failed legislation to understand the background and intent of a bill. In these cases, you can't start with the statute, and you'll need to search for your legislation by other means. The Texas Legislature Online site offers a powerful set of search options, with the ability to search by author, subject, actions, or committees. You can search one session at a time for bills from 1989 to the current session. Information in TLO is updated constantly during session, and TLO also offers a text search for legislation from 1993 to the present. LAS does not offer text search, but does have an advanced search with the capability to search by bill action, subjects, authors, committees, and captions. LAS is not immediately updated during a session, but we're constantly adding new data for earlier sessions. So, for example, you can search by actions and captions back to 1973 and by subjects back to 1985. LAS also allows searching across more than one session. Since the 1970s, the Texas Legislature has worked to make legislative information more accessible. Today, many of the resources necessary for researching recent Texas legislative history are available online, and we're working to make older information more available. Determining the legislative intent of the law still remains a challenge, and sometimes even the most diligent research may turn up little. But the proliferation of online resources makes the research process much simpler and more efficient. Next, we'll be hearing from Eddie Weeks, who will fill us in on researching Tennessee legislative history. Eddie?
Thanks, Catherine. With legislative history, as with so many other things, there are 50 states, 50 ways of doing things. When going from Texas to Tennessee, for example, the difference is one of scale. Texas has 268,000 square miles. Tennessee has 41,000. Texas has a population of 24 million. Tennessee has 6 million. Texas has a budget of over $90 billion. Tennessee is under $30 billion. So with 1/6 the land, 1/4 the population, 1/3 the budget, well, we do what we can. The key to it all, though, is always the same. In the words of the Tennessee Supreme Court, when interpreting a statute, we must first ascertain and then give full effect to the General Assembly's intent and purpose in drafting those sections. So, how do you find intent and purpose in drafting? That is legislative history. In Tennessee, legislative history is floor and committee debate. There are no printed statements of intent and no transcripts. The General Assembly's website at capitol.tn.gov, that's the General Assembly's award-winning website, that award being NCSL's Online Democracy Award. The General Assembly's website provides video links to committee and floor debate for all introduced bills and resolutions. By clicking on the bill number and then clicking on video clip, you may see and hear the legislative history of any and all bills. By using this award-winning website, you may learn the legislative history of any bill, any resolution, all the way back to the year 2009. This covers all but the first 214 years of our state's history. For legislative history from any time in these first formative 214 years, we turn to the Tennessee State Library and Archives, the Legislative History Division. They maintain audio tape recordings of legislative debate. Tennessee was one of the first states to record its floor and committee debate. In 1955, the State Library and Archives began recording and preserving the House and Senate floor sessions of the General Assembly. As time went by, major committees were also recorded. By the 1980s, every meeting of every committee was being recorded and kept. Legislative recorders, state library employees, were assigned to specific committees and given specific responsibilities for recording. For most of these tapes and meetings, there are descriptive outlines of what's on each tape. This outline will list the bills and resolutions discussed, the order in which they're discussed, and often who is talking in the meeting. The amount of detail will vary depending on the legislative recorder, but there will often be references to the tape counter. That's the numbers in parentheses in the text, which can greatly reduce the listening time by pinpointing where the researcher needs to start listening. Tennessee truly has an abundance of legislative history possibilities. Getting to the right spot in that abundance is similar to most states' processes. Use the statute, the Tennessee Code Annotated, to get the public chapter number. Use the Tennessee Public Act books or the Secretary of State's website to get the House and Senate bill number. Then use the General Assembly's award-winning website or the professionals at the State Library and Archives to open up the possibilities of hearing history. The text of all introduced bills and resolutions may be found at the State Library and Archives, and for everything since 1995 on the General Assembly's award-winning website. The text of all introduced amendments will also be kept by the State Library and Archives, are on the website since 1995, and are printed in the House and Senate journals. Amendments, whether adopted, rejected, or just proposed, often give great clarity to the intent of the General Assembly by the language used. Researching legislative intent is often a frustrating and fruitless task. A major rewrite of statute may sail through on consent calendars with no debate whatsoever. Other changes of language may produce hours of debate, which the researcher must listen to carefully, minute by minute, in the hope that the one change of interest to the researcher might be mentioned. However, researching legislative intent is often necessary. and successful research can provide unequivocal triumph. As with so many things, there are 50 states, 50 ways of doing things. How you do legislative history in your state, the ways, the details will vary. Some states will have printed files. Some will have clippings. Some will have written statements of intent. And some will have an award-winning website and over 50 years of audio recordings. Though the process will differ and will have to be learned for your state, the reason is always the same: to ascertain and give full effect to the legislature's intent and purpose. For another state's point of view, let's turn to Nan Bowers in Nevada.
Thanks, Eddie. Hi, I'm Nan Bowers, Legislative Librarian for the Nevada Legislative Council Bureau. First, from my Nevada perspective, I'd like to emphasize and review a few key points about legislative bill research. Then I will spend a few minutes talking about the Nevada research tools that are different from those in Texas. In Nevada, Texas, Tennessee, and most states, remember that the important initial step in legislative research is identifying the bill or bills that add the language you are tracking. A section of law may be the result of a single bill, or there may be 6, 10, or more bills subsequently amending that original bill. The history line for this first section shows the statute was enacted in 1995 at page 2668 of the 1995 Session Law compilation. The second section was enacted in 1965, amended in 1967, 1981, 1989, and 2005. So your first job is to identify the appropriate bills. Often, some of those amending bills can be disregarded if the amendments aren't relevant to your research, such as a bill changing the word department to division, or a bill only raising a fee from $200 to $250. Remember also that sometimes there just is no information on a particular change in the statute. While the bill was in play, some language may never have been discussed or noted anywhere. Finding nothing could even be the best outcome of your research. For a legislative session, researching bills on the same subject that did not pass can be beneficial, as often language from one bill may be amended into another similar bill. The highlighted terms on this subject index page show 2 bills, but only SB 182 has the asterisk showing that it passed. Perhaps language from the second bill, SB 183, which did not pass, was later amended into the first bill. Important information could be found in researching the bill that died. The subject index, or often tables, are useful to identify similar bills. This chart shows statute sections and the bills that proposed amendments to that statute. Again, researching the bills that did not pass could provide clues of intent. Sometimes a bill that does not pass will be reintroduced the next session and the next until it finally does pass. Checking previous sessions for bills on the issue could lead you to good background information. Okay, now the process and tools for researching legislation in Nevada are very similar to the Texas procedures. One difference is we have no bill files. However, since the early 1970s, our session staff use audio recordings to transcribe detailed minutes of the legislative committee hearings. This is a bill history page with links to the committee minutes. Exhibits are also linked within the minutes. Online minutes date back to 1993, online exhibits to 2003. Older minutes and exhibits are on microfiche. The minutes are supplemented by exhibits, which are the reports, articles, and other documents submitted to the committee by staff and by those testifying on the bills. The minutes are linked from the bill history page. Our library staff compiles legislative histories for selective bills and uploads them to a legislative history database available to the public. This screen shows the legislative history search page, where you enter a bill number and year. The compiled histories include all versions of the bills, amendments, fiscal notes, committee minutes and exhibits, Senate and Assembly journal pages, plus any veto messages, ballot language, and links to legislative interim studies. This is the results screen with brief information and a link to the 78 pages of legislative history. I'll wrap up with a view of our library's webpage featuring our legislative history research. And with that, I'll end my presentation and turn you back over to Shelley, our moderator.
Thank you. A big thanks to Catherine, Eddie, and Nan for imparting historical information unique to Texas, Tennessee, and Nevada, your insights, and as a whole, providing state comparisons and complexities in accessing legislative history and intent resources. And in addition, Elvis has some things to say about researching legislative histories in an article authored by one of our former legislative librarians, Lisa Mecklenburg-Jackson, entitled Explore Legislative Histories with the King, available on NCSL's website. It's an excellent and entertaining read. Michael, I believe our speakers are ready to take any questions from the audience at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for questions. If you do have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad at this time. Questions will be taken in the order they were received. If at any time your question has been answered, you can remove yourself from the queue by pressing 1. If you're using a speakerphone, we ask that while posing your question, you pick up your handset to provide favorable sound quality. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you do have a question or comment, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad at this time. Please hold while we poll for questions.
While we're waiting for our first question, it may be interesting to our audience to know how many staff members work in each of these legislative libraries. Catherine, just out of curiosity, how many library staff do you have in Texas?
Our staff varies somewhat. We tend to have a few more people during session, less at other times, but generally around 25 full-time equivalents would be a fair number.
Great. How about you, Nan?
There are 4 people in our Nevada staff, 3 librarians and an assistant.
And Eddie?
Including me, that would be 1.
Wonderful. Like you, I'm sole library staff in Utah. So to the audience, you can see what a difference there is in staff, and of course in population too. Just another question. Results from a recent survey conducted in Utah covering a 3-month period showed that 25% of our research library services are spent in researching legislative history and intent. And can you tell us if you've tracked services over a period of time or can estimate what the percentage may be in your state? And we'll just go in the same order.
In Texas, we haven't done any sort of tracking or surveying. I know that a significant amount of our work does relate to legislative histories. I would say a simple reference, probably at least a quarter, would be certainly related to legislative history in one way or another. And then many of our staff members are also involved in projects like developing the legislative archive system to make legislative history research easier for everyone.
For Nevada, I would say at least 25% of our work involves legislative history work. And again, we haven't had any formal survey, but answering questions, doing our own work, and working through the website, yes, we do a great deal of our time with legislative history.
As for Tennessee, we also don't track how much time we give to any particular thing, but probably a fourth of the time, my big advantage is the State Library and Archives across the street, where they do nothing but legislative research and legislative recordings. But I'd say about a fourth of the questions that I get do involve legislative history in one form or another.
Great. Thank you, all 3 of you. So it sounds as though regardless the number of staff or lack thereof in legislative libraries or even archives or information centers, the demand for histories and intent is about the same. And just from your answers, it's really quite a substantial number when you think about it and you think about the other states that are doing the same thing. Michael, do we have any questions at this time?
Yes, ma'am. We have one question that comes from Tracy Kimball from New Mexico Legislative Council Service. Go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you, and thank you all. That's a really helpful presentation. But I was wondering if each of you could say what you know about how the courts view the materials that you variously have available for cases that involve questions of legislative intent.
Catherine, do you want to start with that?
In Texas, it does tend to vary. There are some statutes in the Texas Government Code relating to the interpretation of the statutes. Generally, in Texas, the courts try first to look at the plain meaning of the statutes and then begin to look at intent, if that's unclear. Some of the documents I discussed are, of course, more official. Others are more background sort of documents. And in some cases, the courts have in some cases found that what the legislature actually passed may take precedence over what they intended. In particular, I talked about the non-substantive revisions. There have been a couple cases when non-substantive revision bills have made some changes that courts later found to be actual changes in meaning of the statutes. And in a couple of those cases, at least, the courts have held that the bill is actually passed. The language of it stands, although the intent of the bill was not to make any substantive change. But it does vary depending on the case and the document.
How about you, Eddie?
In Tennessee, the Tennessee Supreme Court declared back in the 1960s, I believe, nothing except the actual floor debate will be considered by the courts. That was expanded to committee debates later on, but they do not look at bill files, bill summaries, fiscal notes. None of that is considered by the court, only the actual debate in committee or floor.
Okay. And Nan?
There are actually a few court cases here in Nevada that do cite to our legislative history compilations that we've done. And the transcribed minutes are considered the official record of what goes on in the legislative hearings. So those are used extensively.
Thank you. It looks like we have a question in the chat box. This is from Julia Covington in North Carolina. Does Texas clip file include access to the full text of the older articles? Were they scanned by the library staff?
Yes, those are scanned. They do include the full text. They are not text searchable. They're scanned as image only generally. And yes, at least I know everything we've been doing in recent years has been scanned by library staff.
Okay, and we do have another one from Kristen in Idaho, wanting to know if the webinar will be archived on the LRL web page, and yes, it will be, and it will be available soon. Any other questions, Michael?
Ma'am, we have no questions in the phone queue at this time.
Okay. At this time, then, I'd like to remind you in the audience that legislative librarian staff, whether it's 1 or 25 in your state, will provide details unique to your state in how to research legislative history and intent. And we'll be able to direct you to the available resources regardless of the format. To wrap up, I'd just like to share a quote from journalist and editor Norman Cousins, who received the Albert Schweitzer Prize in 1990. A library, to modify the famous metaphor of Socrates, should be the delivery room for the birth of ideas, a place where history comes to life. We hope that the information presented today is beneficial to you. Thank you for joining us.